Hi, I'm Laura Fisher, archivist here at the Petersen Automotive Museum. You might notice that I'm wearing my Petersen red today, and that's because every June we celebrate the anniversary of the Petersen Automotive Museum. Today I have plenty of artifacts that showcase Robert Petersen's evolution from his original Motorama exhibitions to the Petersen Automotive Museum today. The first thing I'm going to do, of course, is put on my gloves because we're going to be handling a bunch of different archival material. A lot of you probably know that Robert Petersen founded Hot Rod magazine in 1948, and not just 2 years later, he started the Motorama Auto Show. The first Motorama Auto Show took place November 16th through 19th, 1950 in Los Angeles, and you'll notice behind me I have the Motorama original advertising banner. It showcases the location, the Shrine Convention Hall, which is actually where the first Motorama took place. It would later go on to take place at Pan Pacific Auditorium. I have a few artifacts to share with you from the original Motorama shows in the 1950s. In one of my original archival unboxing videos, I did share the original Motorama program with you. I do have it again for you today, just to remind you what it looks like. But some of the things that I didn't have with me then that I do now is the original Shrine Convention Hall layout, which is what Petersen would have used to plan the Motorama Auto Show. And this is interesting because you can kind of get an idea of the challenges Petersen might have faced trying to plan the auto show, or perhaps what he was thinking, where things would go, and of course looking at old photos of where things ended up. I have an illustration of what the Motorama Auto Show would look like. I believe this one's from 1950 because I believe that might be the Shrine Convention Hall, though the photo doesn't have a date, so it could have been one of the subsequent Motoramas. And here, of course, we have Robert Petersen interviewing a driver with KTLA. This is from the original 1950 Motorama. And here are some crowd shots of some of the exhibitors. We can see Edelbrock's logo there in the background. Now, the Motorama Auto Show didn't just showcase the newest and most exciting vehicles of the time. It also showcased a lot of aftermarket vendors because, let's face it, hot rodding was very popular. Another great photo says Circle of Champions, and there's some race cars. And the fun part is we do actually have some Motorama editing notes right here. You can see the grease pencil. And my favorite thing as a historian, when people date it for you, we do have the date on the back. Makes my job easier. Another great one of the exhibitors. Now I have with me the December 1950 issue of Motor Trend. Just another kind of issue of Motor Trend, but what's interesting about this one is that we have the advertisement for the first Motorama on the back there. What's interesting though is that Motorama took place in November, and this was the December 1950 issue. So that tells us on a publishing deadline that the issue would have arrived at people's homes or gone on newsstands before the November 16th date of the Motorama show. I also like the headline there, the Russian threat. All kinds of clues to history when you look back at things like this. Now, the Motorama Auto Show would go on to be held for several years. It became obviously the annual Motorama show. And by 1954, it would become the International Motor Review and Motorama. And I do have actually several copies of that program for you. What's fun about this is if you compare it to the original one, which I have here still, we have different colors. It's obviously bigger. And this paper is also a little glossier. And oh, the price for the program is still the same, 25 cents. What a bargain. As you can see with the Motorama Auto Show, Robert Petersen was no stranger to exhibiting the automobile, not only as a point of interest or enthusiasm, but perhaps its history and also the art form of the automobile. Now, during this time when they were developing the Motorama Auto Show, Robert Petersen was also continuing to build his publishing empire. I do have some fun, kind of quirky artifacts from the Petersen Publishing days. These are going to be a lot of fun, everyday office items, but I think they're interesting because they show us the daily life and people who worked at Petersen Publishing, the things they would come in contact with, or perhaps the things that made up their days at Petersen Publishing. So the first things I have for you are going to be some images of the original Motor Trend and Petersen Publishing buildings. Here we have the Trend Inc. building with the staff outside. And this is actually going to be in Los Angeles, not too far again from the Petersen Automotive Museum today. Another Petersen Publishing Company building shots. This one says Motor Trend Publications Incorporated. And I love these shots because these are in-office shots. So here's some of the Petersen staff working in the offices. And of course, Robert Petersen himself. And it looks like he has a bunch of covers of his different publications. I can't tell if he's working on an issue. He has a transparency there in his hand, a photographic transparency. It's very interesting. He's smiling, so I guess things were going well. And here's Robert Petersen at his desk with Ken Bayless. Ken Bayless was in the editorial department for the Petersen Automotive Book Division. A lot of people don't know that Petersen, yes, he published many enthusiast titles, including, Hot Rod, Motor Trend, Guns and Ammo, Teen, but he also published books, and especially trend books, which were enthusiast serials. Here's a picture of him and Margie. This is actually going to be at the opening of something that I'm going to show you next, but I love this shot because it's him and Margie in front of some of the covers of some of his most famous publications. And this is actually going to be 1975. So this is many years after Petersen had already built his publishing empire. So these are kind of fun. I have note cards from Robert Petersen's personal file. Sometimes I want to prank people and write a note and sign it with his name, see what happens. And of course, letterhead with the Petersen Publishing logo on it. Evidence of businesses past, Petersen Aviation letterhead. And just for fun, we have Petersen's many business cards. As a historian that's really driven by visuals and the artifacts that I preserve, I think looking at things like letterhead and business cards are really interesting because you get to see how a brand and their logo developed over time and how they chose to represent themselves to their consumers and to other business partners. I do have one last fun thing to show you from the Petersen Publishing days, and it is a door plaque for Motor Trend magazine. I actually keep this up in my office for fun, but it was rescued from the Petersen Publishing offices that are no longer there, obviously, and so we keep it as a reminder of Petersen Publishing past. So it may come as a surprise to some people. After the Motorama auto shows became very popular, the Petersen Automotive Museum was not Petersen's first attempt at an automotive museum. In June 1975, Petersen would found the Hollywood Motorama Museum. This was located in Hollywood. I do have a lot of fun artifacts from that particular museum for you. So the whole premise of the Hollywood Motorama Museum was actually to showcase automobiles and the entertainment industry. So they often would say, we're the cars or the stars. Here's an original sketch of what they planned Motorama Museum to look like. Here's a fun promo photo of the Bob Hope golf cart in front of the Motorama Museum. Here's Adam West in the Bat Batmobile display being interviewed. A very, very young Ron Howard. Of course, I couldn't leave this one out. Phyllis Diller. Another good Phyllis Diller shot. And here are the Petersens with George Barris at Motorama. And of course, the Petersens themselves at the Motorama Museum opening night. One of the most interesting parts of saving stuff like this is saving the press kits and other press materials that would have been released around the opening of the Motorama Museum. So I do have one of the original press kits from the Motorama Museum. And you can see the tagline right there where the cars are the stars. We'll go ahead and open it up. We have one of the original brochures that they would have handed out to people. And, oh, admission for adults was $2.50. A little cheaper than the Petersen today. Here is the brochure opened up, of course. Now you have to understand this is 1975, right? So this is before the age of social media or internet advertising. Pamphlets like this were how the museum would have advertised itself, besides perhaps a television spot or local ads. This is how word would get around. Of course, we have promo pictures. We have the Batmobile in there. And I just like to always point out we do have all the original press material that would have accompanied the press kit. And of course, you can see I have just a whole stack of press information about the Motorama Museum as well. We oftentimes see a museum or other kind of business venture as the finished product. What archival material like this does is it helps us understand perhaps the challenges that people who were founding the museum faced, what things changed over time, what ideas came to fruition, and what ideas didn't work or got completely thrown out. So that's one of the value of keeping archival material such as this. Eventually the Motorama Museum would close, but moving back in time just a little bit before 1975, we do get to the year 1960, 1961. And that would be the year that the CEBU department store would finish construction on the Petersen Automotive Museum building. Of course, at the time, it was known as the CEBU department store building. I do have some fun artifacts from that era. One of the first artifacts I have to share with you is a photo of the groundbreaking of the CEBU department store building, and this is going to be the year 1960. The building was finished with construction in 1961. Unfortunately, CEBU didn't last very long. They closed in 1964 when Orbox eventually took over, and Orbox was actually in the building until 1986. The building did sit vacant for a while after that point until Petersen bought it and put in the Petersen Automotive Museum. Of course, during CEBU's time, it was known as a pretty elegant department store. In fact, there were a lot of department stores along this stretch of Miracle Mile. We're just across from May Company and down the streets, of course, from Desmond's. On the 4th floor of the Petersen Automotive Museum, today we have our penthouse. But during the CEBU era, it was known as the CEBU restaurant. And I do have some fun artifacts from that time. I do have an unused pair of chopsticks from the CEBU restaurant. And we have right here, says Wilshire at Fairfax. You'll notice I wrapped it in archival tissue, which is going to be acid-free, pH neutral, and that's really the best kind of material to protect very delicate items that are still wrapped in their original paper like this. It can be very difficult to preserve items that are wrapped in the original paper, so archivists have to make decisions about whether it's best to remove the object from its original wrapping and save the wrapping separately or keep it in there. In this case, the chopsticks are wood, So we feel safe leaving it in the original wrapping for the time being. Of course, we always like to reassess how objects are stored and see if they need some modification later on. Here we have an unused matchbook from the CEBU restaurant. I love this one, mostly because the colors are still so vibrant, and you can see the original CEBU orange, which will come up later in another artifact I have to show you. So CEBU was a Japanese department store, and here I have one of the original tags for the elevators that used to be in here. And as you can see, hopefully you can see that the writing is in Japanese. Now the elevators are no longer in the building. We did take them out during the 2015 renovation of the museum. So as I mentioned earlier, CEBU only lasted a few years before eventually the building was occupied by Orbach's department store. By 1986, Orbach's closed down due to slow business. I do have a photo of the building right after Orbach's left, and this is what the building would have looked like when Petersen came across it. Now he was looking for a building actually to put some of his publishing offices in, and he actually thought that this would be a great place for an automotive museum. You can see actually it's been abandoned, and you can see there's graffiti and some other vandalism along the way. Now, by the early 90s, Petersen was already conceptualizing an automotive museum. A lot of people might know that the Petersen Automotive Museum originally partnered with the Los Angeles Natural History Museum. And so we have a lot of early 90s information about the Natural History Museum and Petersen basically planning and collaborating for the opening of the Petersen Museum. I have an original photo of the building as a concept photo. And then of course, here's the Petersen around its opening at night. So as I mentioned, June 11th, 1994, the Petersen Museum did open. I have some artifacts from the museum's planning and from the grand opening night. Just as I had with the Motorama Museum, I have one of the original press kits. And if you open it up, we have some original planning documentation, information about what donors can do, and kind of other partners in public service, things like that. And we have the original Natural History Museum logo here for the person in charge of publicity. I also have the original press kit and the original mailing envelope. This next document, it's not really much visually to see, but it's from 1992, and this showcases the planning of the museum. I actually have a lot of boxes full of planning documentation that showcase how the original creators of the museum were thinking about exhibits, how to curate them, how to present the information, both visually and historically. I like this one because we have kind of them planning. Also, you can see the remnants planning streetscape. So we have the dog cafe mentioned in here and stuff like that. So it's fun to see all those things I remember about the early Petersen Automotive Museum from when I was a kid right here being planned. Of course, we have to showcase images from the opening. I have a few for you. There are so many out there. I just have a few. So that showcase the best parts. We have Margie and Robert giving opening remarks. Margie giving a little smile while everyone's distracted. And Margie and, oh, that's Pete Wilson. All right, Governor Pete Wilson. There you go. That's right, he was at the opening. This isn't from the opening, but it's just a fun example of famous people that were coming to the museum. We have John F. Kennedy Jr. with the Petersens at the museum. And of course, we have one of the original brochures from the Petersen. Just like Motorama, how would we get our word, just like Motorama, how would we get the word out? Well, this was the 90s. We didn't really use the internet for large advertising campaigns yet. And I like that our number used to be 213-390-CARS. So that was the 1994 opening of the Petersen Automotive Museum. Eventually the museum would break off from the Natural History Museum, and by 2015 we would undergo an entire building renovation. Now during that renovation, we of course discovered all kinds of fun things related to the museum's original construction. I have for you two interesting things. So originally, of course, there was CEBU. CEBU's original color was their signature orange, as you saw in the matchbook. And then Orbach's was more of a blue-green. These are actually remnants from the original facade from CEBU and Orbach's. And as you can see here, in the layering, we have CEBU's original orange and then Orbach's blue-green on top of it. So when the facade was demolished, we saved a few remnants like this in order to demonstrate the stratigraphy of the building's history. In addition to renovating the outside, of course, we renovated the inside of the museum. And during the demolition of the interior, we found original terrazzo tile from the CEBU construction. I think it's important to keep small remnants like this because it's part of the building's architectural history, which of course in Los Angeles, architectural history is very important. So while of course we reached 2021 and the Petersen Automotive Museum is now one of the world's best automotive museums, so you could say our story kind of ends here with the history of the Petersen Automotive Museum. However, I do have one bonus artifact for you, and I think this is going to be a fun one. A lot of people might remember in my original unboxing video, I did showcase one of the first Hot Rod magazine issues. Now what I showcased was actually a replica, and that was because our original is so delicate and I don't like to take it out too often. This is often done in museums in order to protect the original. I do have with me today the original in honor of June, of our anniversary month. You can see it's a little larger format, and this one's very special because it's signed by Robert Petersen himself and Wally Parks, one of the original editors of Hot Rod magazine. I want to thank you so much for joining me on our journey through the history of the Petersen Automotive Museum. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, stay curious, keep learning, and let us know what you'd like to see unboxed next.